Hi, everybody. My name is Dr. David Meade, and in this session, we are going to learn about rust dyeing and rust painting. And I am in my home studio. This is a painting that I'm currently working on, building up some textures and basic layouts. When it's finished, it's going to be an echinacea blossom. So hopefully I will get that finished sometime soon. But in this session, we're going to learn, like I said, about rust dyeing or rust painting and how we can do that with some found rusted objects. I'll show you some of my collection of rusted objects and some things I've created. Just remember that you need a natural fabric, preferably an 18 by 18 inch square. That works really well if you're doing like pillows, but you can use any shapes or sizes of natural fabrics. I will show you both cotton and some silk that I have dyed on. You can also do this on 100% linen. As long as it's that natural fiber. So I've never tried it on wool yet, so I'm not sure how that would work. But I have done this with coffee filters, and you can do it just as easily on coffee filters. You just have to be a little more careful and not let it sit for long periods of time. But I'll show you all of those things as we're working. And I hope you enjoy this. If you've ever tie-dyed before, then you will know a little bit about some of this. But we won't be using those typical things like dyes and soda ash for this. So I hope you have fun. We'll just go down that quick list of things that we need again. We need white distilled vinegar, natural fiber fabric, a Ziploc bag, and some water. And then, of course, some found rusted objects. And when I look for rusted objects, I kind of pay attention whenever I'm out and about in shopping plazas and parking lots, walking through nature, anywhere I can kind of find some of those rusted type objects. I've even found some at like yard sales and auctions and tag sales and estate sales, and I'll get them really cheap because I know I'm never going to use it for what it was intended for. I'm just going to be using it for dyeing and painting with. It just depends on how you like to say if it's rust dyeing or rust painting, but you can get some really cool effects. And then once you have your fabrics done, you can do lots of additional things. And I'll show you some options that some of my friends that are fiber artists do as well, and some things that I'm working on. So I hope you have fun and learn, and let's explore and just play together. Thanks. Everyone, here is some of the rusted objects that I like to use that I found. Allen wrenches or old tool pieces or drill bits work really well, and you can even see the rust on my fingers there from touching these items. Here's an old hook and loop. You can see one side is still shiny and the other side is starting to rust, which is nice. I like to store all my rusted stuff together in a tote. That way it can continue to rust. This is a track from something or a bearing. There's some bolts. I could take this apart if I wanted and use different pieces of this. This is an old plow spade or plow blade that has rusted really nicely, and it's even got a hole for that square bolt to go through, which could give some interesting effects. And then here is an old door and lock set. I've not taken this apart yet, but you can see all the interesting pieces there that you can find. This I actually got at an estate sale, and I think I paid $1 for it, but there's even a rusted screw in there. So that could be really fun to use. And these, of course, these back plates here with the keyholes could be really interesting. I've been trying to find some rusted keys that I could use, but I haven't found any of those yet. And then I do have even larger items that I have found and love to use. And this is one of them, and I'll show you something that I've done with this. This is actually like an old ice pick or ice carrier. You would clamp the ice between the pinchers to carry the ice, and so it can give you some really cool effects because of the shapes you can get from it. And as you can tell, I've really used this before with all the rust on it. And again, it gets all over your hands. So now let me put some of these away, and we will get started in with what we're going to be doing and using some of these objects for. I'm actually going to use some of the Allen wrenches that I have, and then I also keep like the smaller things in this tote here, and you can see I have much more drill bits and different rusty type objects So I'm going to pick out some of these really rusty Allen wrenches that I have. Ooh, there's a rusty nail that I found. That could be really cool. So, you know, just dig around. Ooh, another rusty nail. Because we can use multiple objects in the one dyeing process. So, once you have selected the objects that you're going to use to dye your fabric with, you need, of course, need your fabric. So here is some white cotton fabric. I've cut this to an 18 by 18 inch square, and I actually have two pieces so I can use it as a pillowcase. And then the next thing that we want to do is wet this. And I use a spray bottle. I find it much easier than dipping the whole thing and wringing it out. And I keep the spray bottle filled, and it's 1/2 water to 1/2 white distilled vinegar. And then what I do is I just literally spray it down completely to make sure that it is moist and wet. And you can start seeing the shine from the water and my tabletop showing through, which means I'm getting through all of that. And then what I want to do is I want to start laying out my objects into a nice, cool little pattern. So I think I'm going to start with those two in that direction. Then I think I'm going to add my little nails. And I think that might be all I add to this one. Actually, no. Let's add a couple of more of these just to continue this rustiness. And I'm actually going to move these so we kind of look like maybe a pinwheel here. See if I can grab one more of these. My intention for this one is to turn it into a pillowcase, into a pillow cover. So I think that looks kind of nice and like a flower pattern. So I'm going to spray it again right on top of my rusty objects with that vinegar and water, because what the vinegar is going to do is it's going to help activate some of that rust to transfer, because really we're transferring that rust to dye the fabrics. So I'm going to make sure everything stayed in place. That moved on me. This is kind of the hardest part. And lay my other piece over. And you can see it's kind of dry, so I'm going to wet it again. Remember, like I said, we want it really wet. And with me having multiple objects in here, it's going to be a little harder for me to slide it into my Ziploc bag, but I'll show you a trick for that as well. So once I'm kind of like bookending it a little bit, spray it again so it's nice and wet. And then what I will do is I'm going to open my Ziploc bag, my Ziploc bag, and I'm going to start at one side, and I'm just going to slide it under. And it should all slide inside for me, where I can help it along a little bit because it's wet. And then what I do is I want to spray a few more squirts in the bag. And since I am using a natural cotton on this one, I want to make sure if I purchased it from the store and know that it has sizing on it, I definitely want to pre-wash it to remove any of that sizing, which this one I did. And I also ironed it so it was nice and flat because I knew I wanted a kind of symmetrical design. So what we're going to do is we're just going to leave this in this bag. With cotton, you're going to leave it for approximately 1 to 2 weeks. You'll see here in a moment when I show you another one that's been sitting for a little while what starts to happen. And if you're doing silk, silk is usually just a few days, especially if it's a thinner silk. If it's a thicker silk, it will take longer. But then if you're doing those coffee filters, it's usually within like 30 minutes to an hour. It's pretty quick. But now I'm going to put my hand here so I can flip this over. And you can kind of see some of those objects already starting to show through. They're not rust dyeing yet, but you can start seeing them shine through, which is pretty amazing. So I'm just going to sit this aside in my studio for a while, so that for a couple of days. And the thing I like to do is to flip it halfway through the process. So here's one that I haven't flipped yet. It's just started. You can see that we can see a little bit of rust coming through right here, but if I flip it over, you can really start seeing that rusted object come through. This one actually has two objects. It's got this little metal piece that looks kind of like a J or a 7, and then on this side there's just a drill bit. So when that comes out, it's going to be really interesting to see what I get. But, you know, I'll keep definitely, I'm going to flip it back over that way since this is starting to show through. But now I'm going to show you some of the items that I've created. I'm going to start with some of the silk scarves that I've made. Here is one of them so that you can see, and you can really start to see how this rust dyes into the fibers of the fabric. This one even has a fringe, and you can see that it has dyed even the fringe of the silk. So, you know, you can definitely do silk scarves this way. This one was interesting because I actually twisted the silk around the object and got it dyeing, and you can see how that you get different dye effects in different areas, which is kind of the cool part, and you get those different colors of things. So it can really get interesting to what that you end up creating. So the latest project that I'm working on is I'm working on a wall hanging, and I definitely wanted to create a border for the wall hanging. And I'm doing it in 100% cotton, and those ice pick or holders, clamps that I showed you is how this was created. And you can see here, I ended up doubling this so I can have a border for each side, but you can see here is like the pick of that, and here it was repeated. So you can tell that was definitely folded over, and as we move up here or over, you can see this is that top part. Oh, it's loud. I'll grab these again though so you can see it. But you can see this is where it was laid and how that it recreated that image in rust. As many of you know, Mr. E, Ted Ettinger, he said that this kind of looked like the Shroud of Turin, the way in which it dyes. And it really kind of does, and it can remind you of tea dyeing if you've ever done tea dyeing before, because this was solid white fabrics, you know, that has now been dyed, and it's all over. But because you used vinegar on it, you're also going to want to wash this fiber, because you don't want, you know, your textile or your wall hanging or whatever you're doing to have that smell of that white vinegar. So you definitely want to wash it again after you finish with it. I usually go ahead and do all my sewing and get everything put together first, and then I will do a final wash once everything's done. And then another good iron. So this is kind of how it works to do the dyeing process and what it looks like. So I hope you explore and have a little bit of fun. And now I'm going to show you some images of final finished created pieces that were used or created by using this rust dyeing process. So here are some examples of rust dyeing that I was going to show you. This is the one that I had shown you a little bit earlier using those ice tongs. This is that full piece of fabric. I told you I had doubled it so that I could you know, create that mirror image so I can use this as a border for a wall hanging. So this is it right after I had unwrapped it and before it had dried and been washed. Once that you unwrap your piece and you rinse off that vinegary smell, you want to let it dry completely, and then that's when you want to wash it. You know, use just your regular washing machine and wash that fabric just to get that vinegar smell out of it. But you want to neutralize it, and that's why you want to rinse it first, you know, let it dry, and then you can go ahead and wash it in the washing machine. And here's some other items. This is a piece by a Tennessee fiber artist. Her name is Bailey Erith, and this is a rusted piece in that center part, and then she did trampanto embroidery around it, and then she finished off this wall hanging with a fringed yarn edge and border around it. So I think that this is a pretty incredible piece. She just finished this recently, and I think it's pretty amazing with the way that it dyed on the fabric. This is another piece of just fabric here that was done by another fiber artist. You could tell that this is a piece of wrought iron work because of the detail in it, or some type of iron work that they had found to rust. So you can get some really intricate details from rusted objects to be able to put into these creative pieces that you can create. So always be on the lookout for rust is what I say. Here's another wall hanging piece that is done by another artist. This is a pieced quilted wall hanging that is done with rust dyeing as well as using black dye. You can see here that the pieces have a lot of black dye on them, and that was done first. Then they did a dye with rust, and then they did an over dye with rust on this. So, you know, this was multiple pieces. So once they did the black dye and some rusting on fabric, then they did the stitching of the pieces together. Once the pieces were stitched, they did an over dye, and then they did more stitching. So, you know, this was a multiple process to get it to look like this. And then these images are from an artist in the UK that does rust dyeing in fibers. And you can see here that she's working on a large wall hanging. This is from her studio. And she's starting to piece this together. And it's a woven dyed piece with these strips. And you can see how that it's really starting to take shape. So I hope that you've enjoyed learning a little bit about rust dyeing and what you can do with rusted objects and how that you can transform fibers with those rusted objects in a simple and easy process. And this is something that you can easily do with students in the classroom. Have them do it 1 week, let it sit for a week, come back, they could use this and create their artwork. So how amazing would that be? So thanks, and I hope you enjoyed and learned something, and feel free to contact me. And then lastly, I just have to say thank you for watching and attending. Here is my contact information. You're welcome to send me an email with any questions. Follow me on Facebook or Instagram. And just thank you for your time and letting me be part of this experience with Wisconsin Art Education Association. Woohoo! So excited, and thanks everyone.